And then trusting Jesus, love comes as a fruit. Love is by no means the root. Faith alone occupies that place.
That's how I was raised. I was always taught you become a Christian when you accept.
When you accept.
And believe.
And believe.
And what Jesus did for us.
So
I think
not just at least how I was raised.
I think what Spurgeon was alluding to is we're not even capable of that level of love until we meet Jesus. And then from Jesus, we start to gain the ability to love at that level.
Mm-hmm. So we have to know Jesus before we can love him.
To know him is to love him.
Mm-hmm.
See, where does that phrase come from? Yeah, but see, where does that phrase come from?
To know him is to love.
From the song.
I heard a pastor just recently say that love is to know. And, you know, you take a little infant, a child, you know, they are around the parent and there's a bond formed and they begin to trust that parent, and as a result they love that parent as well as the parent loves that child. You know, with you and Chris, you had to get to know Chris. You know, I mean, all of us, you know, have a physical and an emotional attraction to another human being. But, you know, before we I don't know all the loves, the agape and all that, but I do think that, you know, there's some substance to really knowing someone. You put your trust in them, you make a commitment to them, and love is the fruit of that.
Mm-hmm.
So who won the argument between the two of you?
We were playing devil's advocate.
Well, but I think you can, what was it he said? You couldn't love, love, in other words, you have to
the fruit.
Yes.
You have to trust
But
her.
I think you can, well, I sometimes I feel like if you trust somebody and you have faith in them, that you can love, but I think you can love people without it, trusting them and having faith in them. I love a lot of people. I mean, I think you got to have the trust and the faith, and I think it's in that right order. I'm sitting here thinking about a dog. You know, a dog. I mean, dogs are.
Yeah.
We just.
Unconditional love.
Yeah.
You can yell at them and smack them, and they'll come back and put their head on your knee.
Well, we just got a Labrador that's 6 years old, and she would just stand in the middle of the living room and just stare at us. And then she'd find, okay, you're going to feed me. That's fine. Oh, I get to go out and do my business, you know, and then you're going to pet me and you're going to, you know, be nice to me. And by the end of the week, she decided I was okay. But for a while, it was like, you know, who are you?
Yeah, sure.
So, and I think our human instincts are a little bit like that. You know, when you first meet somebody, once you get to know them, you really, as Steve said, you develop that.
I almost think, what about sometimes the more you get to know someone, the harder it is to love them?
It's a different type of love.
It's a different kind of harder too. Yeah. You know? Yeah. I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the more you know, it puts starts hitting any of your buttons or your own predispositions about this or that, or you know. So then they start hitting on those things, and so now is there, like what you're saying there, is there a point where there's a curve down, and then there's this other aspect then is the tolerance comes in, and then the other builders and keepers of the love.
Right. But so you're making it conditional love, Okay, and Jesus and God don't have a conditional love.
No, I'm not thinking,
But it-
no.
You know, and that's the human thing. I mean, we're supposed to love everybody, but you might not like them too much. I mean, and that's a fact of life.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't necessarily saying that it's like we do it intentionally with we have these button things.
Right.
I'm kind of just doing it as an over observation that it's something that kind of naturally happens. Is that, you know, these, you get to, like you said, you know, it's like, yeah, I'm really loving them, you know, and it's like things are, you know, great. And then, you know, you get to know more and more and about them and a little bit more and a little bit more. Now the more things start to make it harder to love them. Right?
You
That's
get
where we
questioning
were.
yourself. I think Spurgeon's more talking about our relationship with Jesus, right? So he's asking, what's the root? Is love the root, or is it faith? So there's been a debate there.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Apostle Paul would argue love is the root,
Mm-hmm.
right? In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where he says, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love.
Yeah.
So, as Spurgeon's saying, faith.
We're told that we love him because he first loved us.
Right.
I was just curious. I was just putting it out there.
I mean, I could love somebody and maybe not have a lot of faith in them or trust them.
But did you initially have faith in them?
And well, the person yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, this is, anyway, it was a situation where, it was a niece that I had not seen for 10 years, and all of a sudden her father died, and I had to deal with her in many respects, and I thought, you know, I've always loved this child because she was my brother's daughter, and, you know, it's been 5 years, and I just adore her. I mean, I truly love her, and I do have faith in her, and I do trust her, but that first couple of years, I didn't. When I first saw her. I mean, I hadn't seen her in 10 years, and she was 28 years old and had no parents, and I was her closest next of kin. A little scary. But,
Yeah, I think Spurgeon's really asking is, can we love God without knowing him? I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, I think the trust recognizes God as God and the sacrifice, and love without that just almost seems a little superficial. Like you teach kids, I mean, they're kids, you have to start somewhere, but I tend to agree with him.
I think I agree with him too.
one thing I will say, it was not a Methodist Sunday school that I went to as a child. It was a different denomination, and I would say my prayers at night and say I love God because I was afraid of Him. You know, and that
fear right there.
Yeah,
Fear of punishment.
yes. In other words, I
Condemnation,
yeah, it was for all the wrong reasons. And then when I finally came to the Methodist faith, I realized God is love, and it was just like a revelation to me. I went, wow. I mean, I don't have to worry about this anymore. You talk about fear. You know, I was afraid. I was so afraid of Him. I just, you know, yeah.
Well, good discussion. If anyone cares, I think I agree with Spurgeon. I think in order to love God, we have to know Him, which requires learning about Him and ultimately trusting Him, putting our faith in Him before we can truly love Him. I think that makes sense.
But to get to know Him, I know of a person that prays, loves God, gave this person a Bible probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I noticed it was on the shelf, and I picked it up and took it out. You know how a new Bible is when it's all together and it doesn't. She had never opened it, but she She's not a Methodist. She goes to a different denomination. They don't do Bible studies. But she just thinks, we have discussions about God all the time. But I thought, you study your Bible? Well, I study the book that the church gives us, which is not, it's something else. And I'm thinking, okay. So I get very concerned about her. I think, are you really going to go to heaven? Are you going to have eternal life, honey? So anyway, great. And I'll be another good discussion we'll have with her next time.
Well, we can't force people to want to get to know God. So
no.
In fact, that segues into our next question: why do we love Jesus?
Because he first loved us.
Mm-hmm.
Because he first loved, right? He chose us, right? He's chosen us, but now we have to choose him, right? So we have to pursue him. He's pursuing us. We have to pursue him. And I think this is where the trust comes in, right? So we have that trust because he went first, right? He gave his life for us, so we can trust him. And then so how can we love him more? Which we kind of already talked about some.
Love grows, so the more that I learn, and the more that I strip off sins that are identified over a lifetime and build my faith as I feel better, I trust more.
As you feel better, you trust more.
Well,
What happens those periods of your life where you're not feeling good?
But from the faith increasing, from the sins dropping off, and purifying, sanctifying?
You sanctify.
Sanctification process. Everything kind of goes together. The trust it's like an all one bundle thing. So then love is increasing, and things are shining better inside. And when each of us or myself, we see more of that happening, then all the bond increases. The times of doubt are less. All the other things, problems are made small and mountains are leveled, and so it's like this all-encompassing process to me, and that's why I wish I had continued to do some more studies and spend more time in the Word lately. Not so much as before. Most of my days with and just do it. But still working on everything. Things that we don't know we're sinning. We learn we're sinning.
This is spending more time with him, right?
Yeah.
What else do people put?
Looking for evidence in the world.
Looking for evidence of God in the world.
Being aware that at work and other people or in situations.
Yeah.
Being on the lookout for it.
Studying his word.
Mm-hmm. Praying.
Mm-hmm.
Praying.
Instead of loving others.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Follow his commandments. We can.
Practice what he preaches.
Yeah.
Tatiana and I were just talking down in the fellowship hall at dinner, and we mentioned, trying to look out for God in the world, and it's amazing. Just talking about Hurricane Ian, how just humanity kind of rallying together in the midst of disaster, and that's just clear evidence of how we can love each other well in the midst of pain and suffering. So, seeing God in other people. The Christ in me sees the Christ in you. Very good. Well, that was just one verse, y'all. You see how much time we spent on one verse?
It's packed.
It's packed. And that verse is so, we quote it all the time, but I don't think we necessarily kind of fully understand the extent of those 8 words. It's a lot in just 8 words. So we went over question 8 already, so there's one more on the back. So there's question 9. And that is, why should we find it difficult to show love sometimes?
Sinful nature.
Our sinful nature. Mm-hmm.
Fear.
Fear of being hurt.
That's fear of being hurt.
That's what I said.
Fear of being hurt. That's not the truth.
There's so many evildoers that want to advantage. They want to advantage
Take advantage of us.
our good nature, our love, our faith, trust.
It's always easy to love people all the time.
Some people have to be loved from a safe distance. There's a reason God gave us discernment. Self-protection is sometimes a form of love. You know, getting too close to people who might be bad influences on us.
Right.
We might have to have a healthy distance in love, I think.
I think this lifestyle
Yes.
that we can live.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to love others when we're consumed with our busy schedules. And we can spend a lot of time talking about loving people at an arm's distance. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
The boundaries. It reminds me of the prodigal son story. How, the father was loving the son at a distance, but the son had to, in order for the reconciliation to happen, the son had to choose to come back.
Mm-hmm.
The father didn't necessarily run after the son, right?
Right.
I think sometimes today's world, the politics and all the things out there that people there's so much diversity going on. And I think diversity sometimes in your thought processes and what's going on makes it difficult to love people sometimes. Like the 5th phone call you've had, robocall wanting to sell you a new air conditioner when you just bought a new one 6 months ago.
Or they want to buy your home.
Yeah, and when I just put the phone down and I said, Susan, they're getting paid to do this. Be nice. Don't yell at them. They're hard to love.
But I think when you've been hurt by somebody, that's a real hard thing to be. When you were hurt by somebody, you just want to keep your distance and not have any kind of social or any kind of conversation or anything. You might still love them, but you just don't want to be around them.
You don't want to be hurt the second
That's
time.
right. And after 2 or 3 times, it just makes it virtually impossible to be around that person.
It's an area of constant work for giving.
That's what I was gonna say.
Okay, but still
Yeah.
not forgetting.
Right.
And then having to relate with them. Maybe they haven't been around for a while, and then all of a sudden you got to relate with them. So immediately, of course, the past is, if you never did get settled with them, I'm experiencing this myself, and you still haven't put it to bed, whether you totally have forgiven them, and it's still in committee, then there's no way for me to still yet to deal with it with them. I think, and it makes it hard.
Well, it's kind of like an
Makes it
elephant in a
hard.
room, it doesn't go away. And and as Christians, I think the brain has you can forgive somebody, but you're not going to ever forget. And that's something that I think, my own personal self, I can forgive, but if your mind doesn't forget it, what happened to you, then it's fruitless.
I had this discussion today with my son, or not today, but just so far this week, since Sunday, and I made a mental note about the forgetting part, to ask you if there are any kind of scriptures that can help with the not forgetting part. I mean, is it okay to not forget? I mean, or do we have to wipe that out too? Now, if I'm put in a position where I got to start erasing parts of my, memory, then I'm doing self-harm to myself.
I
don't think Scripture says that I'm supposed to harm
I don't
myself
think
that way
forgiveness equals forgetting. Forgiveness is not equal forgetting. Yeah. Now, if you're holding a grudge and you really haven't forgiven, and there's also a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, a huge difference. So forgiveness is honestly largely for you, right? Because you're not holding this resentment, you're not holding this anger, this bitterness towards another individual. But reconciliation is a two-way street, right? And sometimes it's not even possible to be reconciled, or it's not even healthy to be reconciled. Sometimes you have to draw that boundary and love that person from afar. If maybe not even ever that person will be ready to be reconciled. But forgiveness doesn't equal forgetting. We can't forget how we. Our life experiences and how people treated us.
So
but we can't hold a grudge on that person. Because that's gonna turn our hearts cold.
Yeah, because that person that you might have a grudge against doesn't even know you're holding a grudge. You know what I mean? Right. They have no clue. But reconciliation is the key.
If possible.
Yes, that's the key. But I've always thought of my brain as like the card catalog at the library. It's there somewhere, you just have to find it.
I agree.
And that's the way I've always looked at it, because to remember somebody's name, it's there, but
Good luck on finding it.
So,
come on Sunday. I'm
question.
preaching on some of this on Sunday.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah. It's not going to be easy. I'm still in the process of writing the sermon.
So are you kind of, with the not forgetting, because I'm really in the process this.
Come on Sunday.
Yeah, next Sunday.
Come on Sunday. She'll tell you.
Because I'm thinking, and I'm hearing that I'm supposed to take the not forgetting into the land of use it during discernment. Use that instance, use that happening. That's the not forgetting. Learn from it, use it in the future and everything else. And it seems that I can't do that all the time. Here I go, I said can, and that's probably the only 12th time I've said it in my life.
I think it's also important to realize that the forgiveness it can be a very long process sometimes. So there might be times where you think you've forgiven someone and then you realize, oh wait, I haven't. Yeah. So it's not just like a split second thing, but forgiveness is a lengthy process.
But could it be about, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't think we can forget, but something can be moved from the forefront of our mind to being more in the back.
Yeah.
So it's not consuming us.
Mm-hmm.
So to get settled with it somehow.
I mean, I don't know that means that you're not. I wouldn't say that means you're always settled with it. It's just what you were saying. But
forgetting can be cutting the ball and chain that you've been carrying around, okay, and you move on with your life rather than it undermine you, whether it be on a daily basis or throughout your life. And so you can forgive somebody and move on. They may not forgive you, like Cindy said, they may not even know that they offended you in some way. But reconciliation is important as far as trying to rebond again or to develop any trust in that person. And even so, it's going to be a tiptoe situation, because of, past transgressions against one another.
So it's okay for me to declare it reconciled as I reconcile it and not have to have the second party reconcile portion of it. So God gives me, that is part of it.
Your mind's not going to let you forget the nature and the character of the individual. And until you see transformation in that person, then
Right. And
There's
if there isn't transformation, maybe God's speaking to you that, this is not a great influence. So this person is not going to help you lift you up.
Yeah, I mean, if you're around a dog and that dog barks and snarls, you know that you want to back off. When that dog bites you, then you know you don't want to go near that dog again, because that's his nature, that's his character, that's his behavior. And that's an animal, but this is part of the human condition as well.
Very helpful, thank you.
Well, we have to remember that resentment doesn't harm the other person at all.
No.
It only harms us.
Mm-hmm.
And the best definition I've ever heard of resentment is we take the poison every day hoping the other person dies.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Definition of insanity.
Hate always hurts the hater.
So you're kind of letting the person that you don't like irritate you,
I'll control you, right?
and they don't even have to work at it.
Yeah.
It's our resentment.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that was week 6. So we have like 10 minutes left, so we could, who all started week 7? Did anyone start week 7? Yeah, so maybe we can hit the first 1 or 2 questions then. So week 7, so we're in the final chapter, chapter 5. So the first question of week 7 asks, so what does John mean when he writes in verse 6, this is the one who came by water and blood, Jesus Christ. And I asked you all to read Matthew 3:17 and Matthew chapter 27 verses 45 through 54 to help you answer this question. It's a very confusing verse. So what do you think this verse means?
His baptism and his crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
His baptism and his crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Does anyone have anything else?
I saw a note in my Bible that said that some people think it's when the water and blood separated at the crucifixion, but that's not what I think. I think it's the baptism and the crucifixion. I thought that was an interesting.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So there's several views here. So I'll just read, it's a lot. I'll read what I put. So several views. So water and blood could refer to the sacraments of baptism and the Eucharist. But there is a major problem with this view. So John's interest is not in the rituals of the church per se, right? Like he's interested in sound doctrine and Christology, or knowing how we know Jesus Christ and who he is. So that interpretation isn't necessarily the most right one. So the second view, which I think Elizabeth was just talking about, is found in John 19:34. So it's that while Jesus was on the cross, his spear was thrust into his side and brought forth blood and water. So in this sense, John may be saying that the cross is the significant saving event in Jesus' life. This may be important for those Gnostics who claim that they were without sin and had no need of ritual cleansing. Remember, we talked about that towards the beginning, how they had a faulty sense of sin and moral behavior. Right, so some Gnostics believe that they were totally without the sin nature, which is not accurate. But one difficulty with this view is the closing phrase of verse 6, not by water only, but by water and blood. So John is making a counterpoint to some claim involving only or primarily water. So the third view is what we've talked about. So talking about Jesus' incarnational ministry on earth. So Jesus' baptism, obviously referring to the water, and crucifixion, the blood, framed his ministry. He was declared Son of God in the Jordan, and he obtained even more power and authority through his glorification on Calvary, on the hill of Calvary. John may be refuting a docetic or pre-Gnostic tendency that downplayed a complete incarnation. So this were the Gnostics that, didn't believe that Christ was fully human and fully God. So yes, you all got that. So it represents Jesus' baptism and crucifixion, which points to his full incarnation. Emmanuel, God with us, God in the flesh, walking among us. All right, so question 2 here, which will probably be the last question tonight, and we'll finish up next week. So what are the 5 pieces of evidence that John names for the incarnation, that God is coming in the flesh by the sending of his Son, Jesus Christ? So there are 5 pieces of evidence he talks about in chapter 5. So it's under testimony concerning the Son of God.
What's number 4? You doing number 2 or number 2?
What question is that?
No. What was the 5 pieces? This question 4.
Yeah, 4 is the 5 evidence.
Wait, what do you all have for question 2?
Why was his testimony of evidence important? Is it faith in that out of the water and the blood?
Oh, I don't know why I got that mixed up. What's question 3 for you all?
What men testified about Christ?
Yeah, I don't know why I have different numbers. I must have done that.
Which one would you like?
Which one did you all
It's on
answer?
page 19.
Yeah, I have it different for some reason. What question did you answer?
answer?
I couldn't answer
Which
that.
one do you want for us to answer?
Well, I don't want you to answer one you haven't done yet.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask a question more.
So I was looking at the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist.
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably one other discussion, but just interesting to me. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my dearly loved Son who brings me great joy." So what was significant about the baptism? I mean, to me, Jesus was not someone who needs to be baptized. Like, he's already the Son of God. He is God. It's just an interesting, I couldn't really wrap my head around that passage very well.
Why did Jesus need to be baptized?
Yes, and at that moment, something obviously significant happened, because I think you read a portion of it.
Yeah.
And so, any ideas about that?
I would probably need maybe with more time on that. The only thing I can think of is because, yes, Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully man, right? So we're kind of holding those two in tension with each other, but he was fully man. And at his baptism, we kind of also see the glory of the Father descending upon Christ. So that's kind of my initial response.
I guess he's giving the world more testimony through John, who witnessed it,
right,
as to that event,
right,
and God,
But let me. I'm gonna write that down because that's a good question, and I'm gonna look into that more.
John told